Hey, what's up guys? This week we are in the Ajijic Plaza for Open Circle. We're going to head on into the Exotica where Kat Miller is going to introduce this week's speaker.
This week's presentation, Global Warming, Climate Change, and Renewable Energy for Mexico. Dr. Aitken is going to talk to us about all these topics. He's a 12-year resident of Ajijic, is a former research professor of high-energy nuclear physics and astrophysics at Stanford University, and founder and longtime chairman of the Department of Environmental Studies at San Jose State University. He later served as the executive director of the U.S. Department of Energy's Western Regional Solar Energy Center and as the senior staff scientist for renewable energy, policy, and economics with the Union of Concerned Scientists. He is widely published and has received many awards for his lifetime service to these fields. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Aitken.
Wow, what a crowd. Oh my gosh. 2 years ago, I was supposed to give my 11th annual talk on this topic, and 2 weeks before the talk, I became ill and was in the hospital, and we never had the talk. So today, I'm going to focus on 2018 and some on 2019, but I will fold 2017 into it as well. So we'll have a general overview of this. I have to put in a disclaimer. First, I want to thank my two able research assistants, Leslie Kingsbury and Sonia Brees. They were not hired to do that. They just simply did this and sent me a lot of wonderful resources, many of which that I've been able to use. So thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Sonia. This is the size, by the way, that the letters will be on most of the slides. So you don't have to worry about the small ones. I'm hoping you can all see them. I have to do this at this point because it's a YouTube disclaimer. The material was presented for an unpaid public lecture in Ajijic, Mexico. Yeah, I don't get any of that money that you guys just did. I've made an effort to include attributions when I can, but many slides don't have any. While this may be shown by others in private or educational centers, because it's going to be on YouTube starting in a week or so, if you wish to do something different, you have to contact me first. Here's the contact and also at the end of my talk. It's wonderful it's going to be on YouTube because I cover so much material. People generally understand what I'm saying while I'm saying it. But then when they go home, they say, whoa, I'm not sure I remember anything. It was too much. The YouTube will give you a wonderful chance to review it. Additional note is I just throw slides in that have this format occasionally, all of which came to me by Dr. Jeremy Leggett, a friend of mine in London. The state of the global climate in 2018, and I'm going to start out with 7 areas of rapid, significant, and worrisome change in 2018. You'll see my style here. I learned a long time ago as a professor that some of my students learn better when they listen, some of them learn better when they see, and some learn better both. Even though I'm going to show a number of slides with words on them, I'm always going to be reading those words, especially if anyone here has any vision difficulties or you're too far back or too far high up there. And I have an agenda, really a couple of agendas. The one agenda is for you to leave today not thinking of global warming, and yes, Kat, we can use that term. I know they've switched and they now call it climate change, which is the impact of global warming, but it's not just. Global warming makes things hot. That's an impact too. So I use those words. And the agenda is that you will leave today not thinking of global warming and climate change as these global issues, intractable issues, and whoa, we got to do something about this somewhere, someday, somehow. I'm going to get very personal with this, and in the slides I show, especially with floods and hurricanes and fires and all that stuff, you'll see that I'm going to personalize it until you realize that these are human tragedies. That global warming and climate change are human tragedies worldwide, and we need to think of them as we would to think of anything else that's causing enormous human tragedy. That's for the poor people, differentially for the poor people, for the children, for the older people, but also for everyone. And you won't be able to continue to say, but not for me. That's not the case. So as we go through this talk, keep thinking about this. That could have been me. This is about people. I need to help those people. That's the attitude I want you to have when you leave here. And the second part of the agenda is one of optimism. Those of you who know me know that I maintain optimism in the face of overwhelming evidence to the opposite. So let me tell you a little bit about the agenda of this talk. There are 4 parts. The first 2 parts, I'm going to be giving you the overview of what's really been going on, the enormous acceleration of the impact of climate change on the globe. And then the part 3 and part 4, I go under the title of What Can We Do Now? And I start out in part 3 with Mexico, because in the last 2 years since I gave my last talk, the advances that Mexico has made in solar energy and renewable energy are absolutely astounding. And I'm going to be, yes. Good. And I'm going to be showing pictures of that. I'm going to be explaining that. It's an amazing, positive step. And Mexico is not the only country. Other countries, states, cities. And we're going to show that. And then the final part addresses the question. A person just came up to me and said, am I going to address the question, well, what can I do? Just one person. The final section is going to be focusing on 2 women, one 29 years old and the other one a girl 15 years old. The 29-year-old is really reshaping in many ways the U.S. government. The 15-year-old has started a global movement of hundreds of thousands of people. And they're really, it's so impressive to see. And I think people can understand how one person can have an enormous impact and effect. So there's the agenda. Excuse me, oh, I shouldn't do that. So the first review we've got is rising global temperature. 2018 was the 4th warmest year that we have had. This goes back to almost 100 years, but you can see that we've really turned a corner, and this is what made the corner. World War II, we industrialized just to try to fight the war, and there's just all sorts of stuff going in the atmosphere. The global post-war recovery, then it was kind of steady development, and then we really hit the global development and industry, and that's led to, and vehicles, of course, has led to this enormous increase of CO2 into the atmosphere. Rising global temperature, a little hard to see, but you can see 2018, very tiny, I'm sorry, but the 4th warmest year in history. Well, why is it not the 1st warmest year? Well, it happens that the past 4 years, 2015, 16, 17, and 18, taken together, are the 4 warmest years together on record. In contrast to the other top warmest years, 2018 began with La Nina conditions. That's a cooling of the current off Ecuador, which are typically associated with lower global temperatures. So now if I show it that way, you can see that the highest temperature we had in 2016 was an El Nino year, and it was depressed in 2018 with a La Nina year. Well, here's the history of that. This is Earth's temperature, and you can see whenever we have El Ninos, there's a big bump up in global temperature. When we have La Ninas, it's down. We're just now entering a new El Nino. What can we expect then for the next bit? Well, the next 5 years could truly break records. This is the warmest. We're already again in an El Nino mode. The last 4 years and 5 years periods both are the warmest 4 and 5 year stretches on record for the contiguous U.S. Now, I'm commenting on Canada, so Canadians don't worry for a minute. By the way, I know all you Canadians are really sorry you're here, because you could be up north just enjoying that blizzard, just loving it. And those of you from California are really sorry you're not there, because you could be back in California enjoying the drenching, flooding rains you've got. Much of Europe had its warmest years on record, and the records go back to 1880. I'm going to be saying over and over again, not that things got warmer, that we had more storms and things like that. We set record after record after record after record just this last year. Things are happening very, very fast. Now we go to Canada. What really surprised me is through the 29-year period from 1981 to 2010, most of Canada was cooling. I always thought the global warming would go up into Canada and agriculture would move up there. You'd have wheat and corn production and it'd be great for Canada. That hasn't been the case until the last 5 years. And then things changed. And in the last 5 years, and you can see now by the yellow and red color in Canada there, that Canada has also now really joined the crowd and begun to heat also. Ajijic, there we are. We have two. We're warmer than we were, but about 1 degree Fahrenheit. Well, with this incredible planetary heat that we had on the 5th of July, and Canada did not escape that. There's Quebec and Montreal. The variability of the climate change is rearing its ugly head there. Blistering heat wave claimed 54 lives in Quebec. 28 of the deaths were in Montreal. Meteorologist Taylor Ward said the region has seen record high temperatures and high humidity since that last Sunday. So Canada is not escaping the scourge of anomalously high global warming and heat. Well, let's look at a different one. Let's look at the ocean temperature, the ocean surface temperature. Very difficult for you to see up there, and I'll just tell you. But it shows the temperature off the east coast, eastern seaboard of the U.S. And that temperature is almost 3 degrees warmer than it had been 29 years ago. That provides a huge increase in power to hurricanes that come ashore. Well, let's go to our second overview. Levels of carbon dioxide concentrations continue to increase, and they have been doing that. This goes back to 1880. It's just absolutely continuous. This is global, of course. There it is. It breaks a little bit where it starts going even steeper this millennium. And levels of carbon dioxide continue to increase in 2018. And that's the scary thing, because if you look at the U.S. here, you can see that the U.S. really was declining some. We were getting more efficient. Our economy was expanding while global warming emissions were going down, which helps show that you can have extremely strong and expanding economies while addressing these problems. Forget about it this last year. Our emissions in the U.S. grew 3.4%. It's very, very bad. Well, this is where the global warming emissions come from in the United States. As you can see, most of it is carbon dioxide, which comes from fossil fuel burning. Next is methane, which comes from both agriculture and leakage from gas wells, especially the new fracking wells that they're doing carelessly, and methane is leaking there. Every molecule of methane has 25 times as much damage, global warming damage, as every molecule of CO2. This is a bad trend. Nitrous oxide comes from your automobiles, CFCs, HFCs come from your home. And this is the scary one then, because that's the increase in global methane, largely from energy production and primarily from new gas production. So let's look at the third one of these trends now, sea level rise. Sea level has been rising regularly, but not monotonically, because it started in 2011, sea level started rising even faster. And that's because that began the period where the glaciers themselves on the Antarctic began to melt, as well as on Greenland, that the glaciers began to accelerate their melt. Excuse me. So that little bit you can't see, but you can see it's turning up, showing once again that the sea level rise increased. If you can't see it, just take my word for it. The sea level rise increased last year as well. Well, the ocean heat content is now at a record high. Another record. There's the ocean heat content going up as it does, dramatically. That's the amount of heat that's stored in the ocean. 90% of the CO2 in the air goes down into the oceans. About the same amount of the heat that's generated in the atmosphere ends up in the oceans. They're repositories, so they're warming up also. Oh, what does that do? Some very bad things. The greenhouse gas emissions humans have already injected into the atmosphere have heated up the planet, the atmosphere, and the oceans, and now pack so much more moisture from ocean evaporation into the air and the ability of warmer air to hold more moisture that they heighten the risk of more extreme precipitation. It's not a risk anymore. Ask the Californians, ask anyone. Here's what I said, 90% of the energy trapped by the gases goes in the ocean, of the energy trapped. For each 3-month period in 2018, the ocean heat content in the upper 700 and 200 meter ranges were the highest or second highest on record. Here we go, breaking more records again last year. Well, ocean acidification. There's the 5th one we'll look at. There's a trend. Absorbed carbon dioxide reacts with seawater and changes the pH of the ocean. The process is known as ocean acidification. Observations in the open ocean over the last 30 years have shown a clear trend of decreasing pH. What does decreasing mean? If you remember, high pH is alkaline, low pH is acid. That's why they call it acidifying the oceans. And the problem, I'm sorry, I'll go back for a sec. The problem with that is mollusks, things that make shells and live in shells, are having more and more difficulty making the shells because they start to evaporate in the more acidic water. It's having, one thing I read said that the ecology of the oceans has already changed irrevocably. Here's the number 6, sea ice well below the average. Well, let's start with the Arctic sea ice. That's the ice around this is the ice in the summer ice really in the Arctic Ocean is what we're speaking about right now. Notice the melting rate of it. Notice that it got faster, and notice it's getting even faster right now. The sea ice extent was well below the average throughout 2018 and was at record, here we go again, record low levels for the first 2 months of the year. That now exposes an enormous amount, about 1/3 of the Arctic Ocean now is exposed to sunlight to warm the water, whereas it used to be covered by reflecting ice. The September monthly sea ice extent was 28% below the average. That's about 1/3. Okay. The 12 smallest September extents for Arctic sea ice have all occurred in the 12 years since 2007. How about Antarctic sea ice? This has been quite an enigma for a while. That's what it's been doing. But sea ice includes the ice shells. Ice shells are ice that floats on the surface of the ocean. If it melts, it doesn't make any difference to the height of the ocean because it's already floating. Why did it increase? Well, we already just learned that we have more moisture in the atmosphere, and when you're down in the cold environments, what would be rain up here becomes snow down there. So there has been an increase in snowfall onto the glaciers and onto the ice shelves in the Antarctic area. Until, don't know what's happening, but something extreme is happening. The main thing that's happening is that the glaciers are now moving 3 times faster than they were toward the ocean, and they are now melting faster. And that's ice on the land in the Antarctic area. And when that melts, that raises the oceans. Glaciers are shrinking. Again, the usual trend, always the same sort of thing. 7 out of the 10 most negative mass balance years were recorded after 2010. Mass balance is just the amount of ice there is in the glaciers. 7 out of the 10 most negative ones going down have been recorded. All right. There's sort of a 2018. That's just 2018 I'm showing you. Think of that. All those trends I showed you, all those new records, that's just last year. Well, let's go to part 2 because I want to talk about climate science and weather and differentiate it and then talk about weather for a while. So let's start here. What is climate science? It's a misunderstood term by many, including higher-ups in our government. Climate science is the study of regional and global climate as a system. Climate scientists aim to understand and replicate through modeling how the climate system works as a whole. Climate isn't weather. Weather is what's happening over the short term, and it also should say, and over local areas. Climate is what happens over the long term. Weather tells us what to wear on a given day. Climate tells us what we should put in the closet. That's a good way of thinking about it. People say, how do we know the science is any good? We get the challenge to climate science all the time. Excuse me. Just a moment. How do we trust the models? The models are so complex. But he, and I'm sorry I didn't put whoever he is, said that's the essence of science. You think you understand how something works. You make models, you make predictions, and you see if they come true. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where we see it has come true. And while that's intellectually pleasing to scientists, it totally sucks. That's a scientific term, you understand. People say, how do you know that the science is any good? How do we trust the models? They're so complex. I just did that. Sorry. Okay. So this shows you the consistency of models in actual global temperature. Here are the 5 top global models that we have in 5 of the major laboratories in the world. And see how well that they track the temperature of the Earth. They're really very, very good now. What is climate scientists? A research scientist said, while we still can't see climate emissions, we're already beginning to feel their effects. Oh my goodness, yet. I just showed you what 2018. I haven't begun to show you yet what I really want to show you on how we feel it. It includes more intense hurricanes, floods, wildfires, droughts. The world's oceans are getting hotter and more acidic, killing marine life. Insect pests like ticks are thriving, and on and on and on. The question is, how bad are we going to let things get? And that's an appropriately put question. How bad are we going to let things get? Keep that in mind. Science is giving us an increasingly clear picture of how global warming is changing the weather. The scientists of extreme weather attribution brings climate change to our doorstep. There was a major report that came out a little while ago. We're finding now, they used to say, well, there's a big storm, but we couldn't necessarily say that climate change had a role in that. We're better than that now. We actually can attribute particular major storms, major climatic events, major weather events to climate change. That's new. The next few slides show you weather in the age of extremes. Comes on top of multiple extremes, all kinds and all kinds of places. We start with the globe and we look at Australia sitting there baking. But we look up there at Canada and Canada is freezing. At the same time, Australia is baking. That's weather, not climate. Well, this is fun for me because Adelaide, Australia is where my mother grew up. And on that one particular day, the temperature was 116 degrees Fahrenheit. On exactly the same day, Madison, Wisconsin, where I grew up, was minus 31 degrees Fahrenheit. 147 degrees temperature difference just between those climate events. Such are the variable weather impacts of climate change resulting from global warming. A recent study found that the extreme heat wave in Australia was made 23 times more probable because of climate change. 1 month later in Australia, 1 month after that incredible heat spell, they were being flooded in northern Australia, hundreds evacuated. How would you like to find that in your front door? At the beginning of 2017, again at the beginning of 2018, again at the beginning of this year, we had the extreme polar vortex causing freezing across much of Canada and the US. Barney, as they call it, was not the first one, it was the third. It's become an annual event. So they called it Barney because the meteorologists color it purple, and Barney's purple, so that's where the name came from. Well, here comes Barney, and there it is going across the central US, the north-central US, and the south-central part of Canada. An extraordinary record-setting freeze. Well, let's talk a little bit about what is a polar vortex. That little circle on the top is a polar vortex. Normally, it's a calm circle of air, current of air that's floating around the Arctic areas. And then below that is the jet stream that also goes generally around the Arctic areas. Well, this is just sort of a picture. You get a sense of the motion. This was a motion picture I took in the camera. And you can see the Arctic circulation going on, and then you see the jet stream circulation. But every now and then, the polar vortex splits into pieces. We'll address why it splits in a minute. And you can see the piece in the lower part is already going down over the States. What does that do? That pushes that jet stream down. When the jet stream is down, you see the arrow coming into the dip. That just opens the door for all of the cold air from the Arctic region to come down. And that's the source of the polar vortex cooling. This came out actually when we had Hurricane Sandy. But one of the theories has been, until recently, the warm air from the exposed water in the Arctic Ocean altered those air currents, caused the polar vortex to split, which then led to the depression of the jet stream, and then led to the cold air coming down. In the case of Hurricane Sandy, it led to the meteorological conditions that trapped the hurricane by the coast and caused the huge devastation and flooding that we had in New York and in the eastern coast. Now, just recently, a paper has come out, and they're not sure that this is the dominant reason. It is a reason, but they're still looking for other reasons. But there's no question it is linked to global warming and climate change. The President of the U.S., as well as millions of others experiencing the polar vortex freezing, asked, "Where is that global warming when we need it?" You all saw that comment. That's the only political thing I'm saying the whole talk. Okay. The answer, it's alive and well, and it's everywhere else. Yes, it was cold in the U.S., Midwest, and parts of Canada. But overall, the globe was still anomalously warm. Check out in this picture. Check out Alaska, Africa, Asia, and Australia. So the globe was warm, even though we were freezing in certain portions. I hear there's going to be another polar vortex this winter. Where are you going? If I hurry, I'll make Costa Rica by Thanksgiving. Trying to escape it. You can't escape it. We're only 1 month into 2019, and meteorologists are already talking in superlatives as extreme weather patterns have brought cities and towns across the globe to a standstill. We're in the 3rd month, just beginning. It's been 2 months so far in 2019. Well, it's not your imagination. Summers are getting hotter. We're missing part of that slide. But anyway, it shows the average in the middle. No, you can't see it. And the red on the right is the warm periods. The blue on the left is the cool periods. And as the summers are getting warmer, the average has moved up. So the average is much higher. Now all of a sudden you can see that the odds of having very, very extreme warm temperatures are much higher. And you can also see, and you need to see that, on the left there's still a little bit of that blue, which says there's still some odds that you'll still have extremely cold temperatures, but mostly warm. Okay, here's your weather forecast. You can all go home now. Global warming is bringing the planet into an era of wilder, more dangerous rains with ruinous and long-lasting consequences. Let's begin to look back now at 2007. I said I'd put some of that in there. Worldwide, according to Munich Re, the world's largest reinsurer, damaging floods and storms more than tripled in number in 2017 compared to in the 1980s. Tripled in number. The company said 2017 was a wake-up call. Obviously, insurance companies are quite worried about all of this. There were 17 named storms in 2017, 10 hurricanes, 6 major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher, and above average year in all respects. A brief note the extremes. That Atlantic hurricane season was particularly bad. There was Harvey. You remember Harvey? Houston pummeled the United States in August. It caused the sort of flooding you'd expect to see once every 500 years, causing $200 billion of damage to Houston. And ironically, it was the 3rd such one every 500 years floods Houston had suffered in 3 years. So forget about those long-term statistics. We're inventing all new statistics right now. Let's look at the physical and human suffering and impact of this hurricane. Here we begin to personalize. Put yourself into these pictures. These are all wind. That's wind damage. Now we go to the water. The fellow in the back of the raft has just rescued the guy in the front. There are other ways to rescue people, and that can include little people, elderly people, people jammed into shelters because they don't have homes, they have no place they can go to now. Or if you go home and look for your home, you don't find a home. This was my home. I have nothing left. Where's everything? Oh, sorry, I want to go back. All of your history, your family history, your pictures, everything is gone. Everything you own is gone. Put yourself into that picture. Think how it would be if you went home, even in Ajijic, if whatever happened. Nothing. No home. Nothing left. This is the picture I wanted you to... Oh, geez. I apologize. Go back. This is in a hospital which is getting flooded, and they're evacuating the people, including the elderly, who are hard hit. This was my home. Whew. 3 hurricanes at once. Irma, center. Oh, I've got water, thank you. All right, I'll take a hand up the glass. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Irma, Jose, and Katia. And you can see that Jose is landing on northern Mexico, which was pretty exciting at the time. But we will focus on Irma in the center. And there's Florida, and there's Cuba. Let's see how well these show up. Yeah, they show up well. Good. September brought Irma. It devastated the Caribbean communities. It was the joint second strongest Atlantic hurricane ever. Sustained winds of 185 miles an hour. Those winds were sustained for 37 hours, longer than any tropical system on record. Another record, anywhere in the world. It generated enough accumulated cyclone energy by itself to meet the definition of an average full Atlantic hurricane season. One hurricane. They are getting bigger, stronger, and more dangerous. 3 consecutive days as a Category 5 hurricane, the longest in the satellite era. Another record. The first time on record that the Atlantic Basin had 2 simultaneous storms with winds of more than 150 miles an hour, Jose and Irma. Next came Hurricane Maria, another Category 5 hurricane with sustained winds of 175 miles an hour. It devastated Dominica and Puerto Rico. You all remember now in 2017 how trashed Puerto Rico was. They're still digging out. And it seems that our government of the United States forgot that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens and did not react the way they would have reacted had it been a state with other U.S. citizens. It's been a bad bit of our record. It is regarded as the worst natural disaster on record to affect those islands. Just asking here rhetorically, more than rhetorically, with these big letters, can you folks in the back pretty well read it? Good, I'm glad. Well, here's Hurricane Irma, seen from inside, and people, of course, having to flee and be in shelters, and here's a convenient shelter where people sleep overnight, and there goes their power grid. So the wind was fierce. There goes buildings. There goes somebody's house. Here comes the water. This is a low-income person. It's a tragedy. The home was all that she had, and it wasn't very much. But now she doesn't have that either. Personal human tragedies. Finally, at the end of the season, Hurricane Ophelia went past Portugal and Spain. I put it here because it was another record, the farthest east of any major Atlantic hurricane has ever gone. 1 year. That was 2017, folks. Model simulations indicated that hurricanes in warmer climate are likely to become more intense, and it's more likely than not that the frequency of Category 4 hurricanes will increase over the Category 4, the strong ones, will increase, even if the overall tropic cyclone numbers don't increase or even decrease. Cyclone, typhoon, hurricane, they're all the same animal. They just have different names according to which ocean basin that they're in. I have a friend of mine, a really dear friend, if he's here, know that you're still my dear friend, who calls himself not a denier, he calls himself a skeptic. And what he likes to do is he throws zingers at me occasionally. And he came up a little while ago and he said, Don, do you know that hurricane frequency is not increased? If anything, hurricane frequency is decreasing, huh? Well, yeah. How about the intensity? The intensity does the damage. There's the answer, but okay, there it is. There's how the intensity has been increasing dramatically. Significant precipitation rounds out 2018. The nationally average precipitation for the contiguous U.S. was the wettest in the past 35 years. The total was largely driven by record and near-record annual precipitation across much of the eastern U.S. And there's a map. And the dark green is much above average rainfall. The dark green is record rainfall. The middle green, yeah, you can't see the words very well, of course, is way above average. The light green is also above average. Then you go to the western U.S., and you see the tan color is below average. So you see the difference. This is when the jet stream comes down across the middle of the U.S. and just divides the country. Topping the list were Hurricane Michael, caused $25 billion in damages, followed by the western U.S. wildfires and Hurricane Florence. Each was $24 billion in damages. These $73 billion disasters were all compounded. They might have happened on their own, but they were all compounded by global warming and climate change. Odds are the fires would not have happened on their own. We'll go into that. With a roar, a flash flood smashes into a Maryland community. On Sunday, that community received nearly 8 inches of rain over a 6-hour period. Rainfalls like we haven't heard of. They say this is a once every 1,000-year flood, and we've had 2 of them in 2 years. The 1,000-year and 500 statistics are long-term statistics. As I said a minute ago, throw those out the window. They mean nothing anymore. Mexico has not been spared, so let's look at Mexico. Unusually heavy rain in Aguas Calientes, too much for storm drains. Tropical depression, flooding rains in northern Mexico, and here in Los Mochis. We were in Los Mochis this last summer. It's a lovely, lovely city, but oh my goodness, it was underwater. In just one day, Los Mochis saw 40% of its annual rainfall. I mean, these are huge. Rainfalls come and go, but rainfalls of this intensity means there's so much more moisture in the atmosphere that can now come down as rainfall. And we experience it as the floods. 70% of the people in Los Mochis suffered because water got into their homes. The United States experienced $14 billion weather disasters in 2018, which resulted in the deaths of at least 247 people and high cost damages. The number of events in the U.S. and their cumulative cost ranked 4th highest since records began in 1980. Topping the list was Hurricane Michael, remember, coming up into Florida, which caused $25 billion in damage, followed by the wildfires and Hurricane Florence. Hurricane Michael, let's take a look at what it was like to be in that. Help, anything, food, water. First the winds, and of course the surge on the seacoast, the surge of the water as well. The power of those things is not to be believed. This is all Florida, northeastern Florida. Hey, this used to be my home. Where is it? Sorry. I get all choked up by this when I show it. 1 month later, Hurricane Florence, 1 month later, showing it coming ashore in Wilmington, Delaware. It was large and very slow moving. That produced extreme rainfall, and it just sat there and kept raining. Parts of eastern North Carolina saw almost 3 feet of rain from the storm that came ashore in mid-September. 3 feet of rain. That's a lot of rain. I do have a... What's this? It's supposed to help my... I'll try anything. I swallowed it. You're supposed to swallow it. Oh! Oh! I thought it was pretty darn big to swallow. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a physicist. Thank you very much for trying. I think it's down. Whew. So we're looking at Hurricane Florence result. Yes, I do stupid things sometimes. Not often. Okay, often. All right. Out of the water and into the fire. If you look on the right side, it shows cumulative acres that have been burned with climate change. On the left, it shows roughly how many acres might have been burned without climate change. What a difference. After California's 5-year drought, this past winter's record-setting rains also spurred tremendous brush growth. Everything's wet. It died off in the summer, making for extensive ready fire fuel. Add the gusty winds ripping through new home developments, and the conditions were ripe for devastation. Oh my. Well, here's the California wine country fires in 2017. Southern California fires, 2017. Brave people. People fleeing their home and pretty much last minute, which is lucky because there it went. And when they got back looking for their home, that's what they found. Or others, that's what they found, picking through the pieces, looking for little bits of pictures of grandma or whatever they could find. Well, some people didn't pay as much attention as others, but you all know golfers. Golfers will golf no matter what. We have a lot of golfers here in IE. California fires and global warming. If you add up all of the fire damage California had from 2000 to 2016, it turns out that 2017 was worse than all those years combined. 2018 is now worse than 2017. Those are the words from the chairman of the Energy Commission, a very dear friend of mine. Thomas Fire, the largest in California history, December 2017. Oh, the Mendocino Complex Fire, the largest in California history, bigger than the Thomas, September 2018. Human tragedies. Human tragedies. The 2018 Camp Fire, the most devastating and lethal fire in California history. That's the third one now. Stronger than Thomas, stronger than Mendocino, more damaging. Boom, boom, boom. 3 in 1 year, 2 years. The Camp Fire is the most devastating. There it is. This shows, for example, you've all heard about the town of Paradise Valley burning. The fire started, it didn't start the fire, but there it was where it was on 6:30 in the morning, and down the bottom where it was at 6 at night, and the town of Paradise Valley was right in the middle. There goes Paradise Valley. There it went. Well, you can see some of this happening. Welcome to Paradise. It's not Paradise anymore. Jack in the Box. Whoop, there it goes. A tourist place. Motel. There it goes. Church. This is sad. There it goes. And there it went. And schools were not spared. Nothing was spared. Everything was gone, including over 100 people killed. Well, they have roads there. People can get in their cars and run away from the fire, right? Well, it didn't work for a lot of people. They had to abandon their cars and try to get out by other means because the fire was everywhere. And for some people, they got roasted in their cars. You couldn't just hop in the cars and escape like that. And the ones who got roasted, I don't have to say anymore. Where was my home? Human tragedies. Where there's fire, there's smoke. Terrific amount of smoke from these fires. In the communities closest to the Paradise Fire, an apocalyptic fog cloaked the roads. Evacuees wandered in white masks. Officials said respiratory hospitalizations had surged. Keep feeling the pathos of these people as I show these pictures. Feel it. It strikes the elderly and the very young the hardest. Smoke impact from the campfire, it went 200 miles south, curved off of San Francisco out to the ocean, but San Francisco itself got a lot of it. And here is the bay during that time. Catherine, I hope you weren't racing at that particular time. Were you? Oh, good. In short, researchers believe that a person's short-term exposure to wildfire can spur, short-term exposure to wildfire can spur a lifetime of asthma, allergy, and constricted breathing. We're setting up a tipping point in the immune system that leads to more inflammation and disease, said Dr. Teen Traja, pulmonologist. She said California is being reset to a new reality. Climate change is projected to cause 250,000 additional deaths per year from heat stress, malnutrition, and the spread of infectious disease by 2050, according to the World Health Organization. Researchers suspect that kids may bear up to 88% of the disease burden as temperatures and sea levels rise to human-caused climate change. This is a lead-in to the way I'm going to be ending my talk, turning to kids to help us out. The global warming aspect of climate science is not new. Dr. Wallace Broecker, the researcher who popularized the term global warming, invented it and first published it in a paper. And he blamed it in his paper in 1975 on the human increase of CO2. His climatic paper, he said, climate change, are we on the brink of a pronounced global warming? He gave early warning of a planetary crisis if humans continued to spew carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That was 44 years ago. You can't say we weren't warned. You can't say it wasn't evident to us from the very beginning that the human influence was the dominant influence. Excuse me. I know I shouldn't have swallowed it. Did we heed that warning 44 years ago? Nope. We're still not heeding it. We're making things worse. And as you've seen in 2018, rapidly worse. You can't say we weren't warned. The link between carbon dioxide and climate change has only grown more clear. The 5 warmest years in recorded history were the last 5. 18 of the 19 warmest years have occurred since 2001. We know about that. So here we go to part 3. Mexico's rapid 2-year renewable energy acceleration. And the reason I'm going here now I'm shifting. I'm shifting to what can we do? And transitioning to renewable energy. I don't think I'd be able to suck something out. Thank you. She's got another one. You just want me to choke to death in front of everybody? Okay. This is dominant, getting away from fossil fuels. I'm sorry. Overall, Latin America, including Mexico, has huge renewable energy potential. Latin America's solar power potential is enough energy to supply all of Latin America's current yearly electricity demand 36 times over. First, let's look at the rapidly evolving economics of renewable energy versus conventional energy and see how the economic changes in the last 2 years have completely reshaped Mexico's renewable energy transition. Well, solar energy has been expanding worldwide in huge amounts. This is sort of fun. Apple reaches 100% renewable power for all of its operations. This is on top of the new headquarters in Mountain View, correct? Yeah. Subsidy-free, now here we go. Subsidy-free renewable energy projects set to soar, in this case in the United Kingdom, largely killing off new gas plants because gas has been cheaper than coal and more versatile. They don't use oil anymore. Renewable energy will be the cheapest form of power in almost every country within 1 year from now. This is an astounding advance. More than 10 million people now work in renewables for the first time. 3.4 million in solar. Look at this. There's the amount of people working in coal, amount of people working in gas, and amount of people working in solar and wind. You want jobs, Mr. President? That's where the jobs are. Renewable energy. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I said I wouldn't say anything more political. This is just his own comment. He said they're working now on a military plan based on a national security need for coal revival. Here's how the people responded to that plan. Climate genocide. Well, as he wants to increase the coal plants in the United States, look at this. In 2001, the dark gray areas were states that relied on coal. 2017, look at them. The states are beginning to drop off. Fewer and fewer are relying on coal. All those little circles are all the location of the coal plants in the United States. All the yellow circles are the ones we're turning off in the 2018 to 2025 period. No, we're not going to build more coal plants. The utilities are not foolish. They don't want to, they do it for economics. They don't want to spend more money for coal when they can spend less money for renewable, and we all gain. Wind, solar, and storage companies are recruiting coal miners for their work ethics and high-tech skills. That's wonderful. Nuclear power, I haven't mentioned it. Well, starting 20 years ago or so, and my PhD is in nuclear physics, my work at Stanford is in nuclear physics, no, not on reactors. I would have the same answer. You want to talk about nuclear power? Nuclear power is never going to make it economically. It's economically dead. Why do we even talk about it? Well, here's what he had to say. He was a nuclear advocate. He headed the International Energy Agency. He says nuclear is ridiculously expensive and utterly uncompetitive. It costs over $9 billion now to build one reactor. Now let's turn to Mexico's 2-year developments in renewable energy and see how this global economic transition has made all the difference to Mexico. Latin America already uses far less coal than other regions in the world, and that's very lucky, because weaning yourself off of coal, that's what the United States is trying to do and other countries is trying to do. Latin America doesn't have to do it. They don't use coal. It's already a wonderful head start. Mexico could become almost, if not completely, energy independent, using its own renewable energy sources. Solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, biomass energy, hydroelectric energy. The potential for solar in Mexico is the 3rd greatest in the entire world. If you wanted to put photovoltaics out and have enough to produce the electricity equivalent for the whole country, it would take 0.14% of the surface of the country. The resource is there. And then wind, the world's greatest resource, is down in Oaxaca and the isthmus, because it's between two bodies of water with different temperature water. Cooler, warmer. But we're now finding, as we know, that there's wind potential everywhere else. They're building wind farms in Zacatecas now. Mexico installed almost 1 gigawatt. That's equivalent to building a nuclear power plant just this year in wind. They didn't build the nuclear, they built the wind. For the first time in its history, the Mexican power sector in 2017 was open for private foreign investment. That is the other absolutely crucial, critical ingredient we have. The lower costs coming at the same time that the rules have been changed and foreign people can come in. This was hugely important. That started Mexico's Renaissance. For example, here's one. Tesla's partner, Guadalajara-based Fortius, opened a new solar wind farm. It had 25,000 panels, 8 megawatts, $14 million project. That was 2017. Not to be outdone in 2017, NL Green Power invested $160 million in a solar plant in Mexico. Has 550,000 solar panels, generates 232 megawatts. Not to be outdone, in 2018, Mexico commenced construction of the world's largest solar photovoltaic system. It's now up and running. You can't fathom the size of that. 2.3 million PV panels, power for 1.3 million households, operational in 2018. The Villanova plant will be the largest of its kind in North America. Come on, well, Canada, US, other Americas, it's the biggest. After the constitutional reforms, this is a different one. After the constitutional reforms of 2013, which allowed for foreign capital to invest in the country's energy sector, an estimated $8.6 billion has been invested in renewable energy, benefiting 6.5 million households. How is all of this happening? Economics. 2017, Mexican government put out a bid for 800 megawatts of new power. That's equivalent to the output of a nuclear power plant. And they said, you can bid anything you want. We don't know what energy field you're in, whether you're in your natural gas, solar, wind, nuclear, whatever. Bid whatever you want. We're going to take the cheapest. That was the cheapest. That's how and why we got it. Solar and wind, PV and wind, are the cheapest sources of generation in every developed country except Japan. So many people still think that renewable energy and solar, all those little things, they're doing a little bit right now. They may come on later on and be helpful. We're there, folks. I always used to say I wanted to live long enough to experience the global solar energy transition. I'm here. $160,000 homes in Mexico now use solar energy. The cost to install the system has dropped 70% in 7 years. The Don and Pia Aitken, in 2007, created the first house and office in the lakeside area with solar energy for all electric and water heating. That was my field. We came down, we solarized, nobody else had done it. The hacienda house is in the background. In the front is a passive solar office that I built, and then put the solar on top of that. And we have this wonderful organic vegetable garden to go with it. The growth in the number of solar houses in the Ajijic lakeside areas since house number 1 has been amazing. 2014, we hit 1,000. We are now over 3,000, and it's growing every day. And at this point, I want everyone in this audience who has solar in your house to stand up, and I want everyone to look around and see how many. Please, everyone who has solar, stand up. Stand up. Well, the rest of you, what's the matter with you? On a measure of installed solar energy per capita, Ajijic and the Chapala lakeside is now the solar capital of the entire country of Mexico. We asked the question, we're going to ask it again as we go along, what can one person do? What can one family do? Well, that's what P and I did. And you'd be amazed at the impact you can have. Thank you, Doc. That's all right. The Mexico federal government's target is 35% of all power generation coming from clean resources 5 years from now. 35%. According to official figures, we're well on track. 2017, 20% of the power already came from clean energy. That includes a good bit of hydropower, you understand. But that increased by 5%. 2018, that wasn't more hydro, that was wind and solar. An agreement between Enel and the federal government has allowed them to raise the goal. The new goal is to have 43% of all energy needs generated in Mexico by renewable energy by 5 years from now. Wow! How far Mexico has come in the past 2 years in moving toward its renewable energy conversion. I think to myself, if I was well and able to give this talk 2 years ago, how different it would have been. In many ways, it's wonderful I waited now to be able to do this. So I'm now on my optimism track. These are things to be optimistic about. They're things to be proud of. Well, let's go to the final one there, final section. Where do we go from here? What do we do now? I'm going to start with a TED talk by Dr. David Putnam called The Reality of Climate Change, and simply in it, he had quotations that were relevant to addressing climate change from some famous people. There is a mysterious cycle in human events. To some generations, much is given. Of other generations, much is expected. This generation has a rendezvous with destiny. That was Franklin Roosevelt in 1936, the year I was born. He was addressing, of course, the terrible depression that we were in. But then later on, less than 10 years later on, he was having to address the terrible war that we were in. And those comments, it holds exactly true for today. We are in our destiny now. Climate change is the big daddy of risks. Failing to be sustainable could be the biggest market failure of all. Hear that, business people. The biggest market failure. Businesses more and more are beginning to realize, gosh, what's flooding and hurricanes and storms and what's global warming going to do to my business model as I project out 10 years and 20 years? We're the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation that can actually do something about it. Isn't that food for thought? That was Governor Inslee from Washington State. He announced 2 days ago that he, along with several hundred others, is the candidate for president of the United States. But the unique thing about Jay is this is what he's about. He's going to make his campaign for the presidency this: climate change and environment. Be interesting to see. How we make that transition to a stabilized and still prosperous relationship with the earth and each other is surely the story of our time. Thomas Friedman, many of you read him in the New York Times. It's the story of our time. We're living in the story of our time. We are making the story of our time. Will we succeed? We have to succeed. You're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. Cleaver said that very, very well. Each of us can think about that. Am I part of the solution? Am I part of the problem? All right, so at the very end of the year, in December of 2018, we had the 24th Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's called COP24. And that's a continuation of the Paris Climate Agreement, that in between they have the COP meetings to put teeth into it. And after an all-night session and a couple of weeks of hard work, they were rejoicing that they had reached agreement. Well, let's think about what that agreement was. Diplomats from nearly 200 countries reached a deal on Saturday, December 16, to keep the Paris Climate Agreement alive by adopting a detailed set of rules to implement the pact. That's what it's for. It calls on countries to step up their plans to cut emissions ahead of another round of talks in 2020. But this was all not nearly enough. This is a situation, let's see how well it shows there. Yeah, you can see the colors. If we continue just the way we're going right now and burning fossil fuels, we will be somewhere in that gray area at the top. And the temperature increase will be anywhere around 8 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. But you can see already that current policies, some of you can read that. In the middle, the current policies don't take us down to 2 degrees. They take us down to 3 to 4 degrees. But what they just did in Poland is they've got additional pledges. So we're getting lower and lower. That takes us down to about 2.6 degrees centigrade to 3 degrees centigrade. But we need to get to 2 degrees centigrade and preferably, and we now realize urgently, 1.5 degrees centigrade max temperature rise. That's the lowest curve. And that shows the task that we still have, and that is not being met by international agreements. Well, it is being met by states and cities. All of the states in green have adopted renewable portfolio standards. A portfolio standard is that the states set goals. Goals for how much renewable energy that they're going to build, they're going to commit to for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, increasing through that whole period. It's wonderful because it attracts industry, it creates jobs. And I'm very proud of this because I'm the one who introduced that policy first in California. Thank you. 82% of people in countries believe it's important to create a world fully powered by renewable energy. There are all the percentages. There's Canada and the US. 84% of the people in Canada believe you can convert to 100% renewable energy. 83% in the US. Well, shouldn't the public will be reflected in the elected officials? Shouldn't we have 83% of our officials believing in this? It doesn't happen. No, don't applaud that one. It's an incredible dichotomy, break. Pope Francis, this is fun. He invited oil bosses to the Vatican, and he tells them that you must switch to clean energy. And on the bottom is a statement, and it's profound. Civilization requires energy, but energy use must not destroy civilization. So he's trying to bully pulpit what he can. And all those people who were there went home and continued to do what they're doing. The Green New Deal. This is one of two incredibly important things that are happening. This is the first of the two women that I'm talking about, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. She and Edward Markey of Massachusetts announced a resolution in the US just in February. She's 29 years old and has made quite a splash in the US Congress already. The Green New Deal is a congressional resolution that lays out a grand plan for tackling climate change. The proposal calls on the federal government to wean the United States from fossil fuels and curb planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions across the economy. That's a wonderful goal. So far, all is good. Here's how it came about. After the 2018 midterm elections, a youth activist group called the Sunrise Group popularized the name by holding a sit-in outside the office of Nancy Pelosi, who was not yet the Speaker of the House, to demand action on climate change. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez joined the protesters in the sit-in, even though she'd just been elected to Congress, and lent her support. That set the groundwork for what ultimately became the joint proposal. The sweeping resolution calls for the United States to eliminate additional emissions of planet-warming carbon dioxide by 2030, was also signed by more than 60 House and Senate Democrats. Whoop. The sweeping targets also include supplying 100% of the country's electricity from renewable and zero-emission sources within a decade. That's a tough nut. I myself wish it weren't quite that fast. But, as I'm going to show you, we can accomplish that goal nevertheless. With Cincinnati on board, there are 100 United States cities now committed to 100% clean energy. Does that include tiny cities? It includes Los Angeles, it includes New York, it includes Chicago. About 48.7 million people, or 15.1% of the US population, now live in places that are committed to transition to 100% renewable energy. We have the states, most of the states in the country, adopting the Renewable Portfolio Standard. We've got cities more and more coming on board saying we're going to transition. And what they all do is they set meeting the Paris Accord obligation that the US had by themselves. And the evidence is they can do that. So the Green New Deal, Mark Jacobson, a Stanford professor of civil and environmental engineering, was optimistic. He's worldwide known for these views. He said that 80% of the Green New Deal's target of net zero greenhouse emissions could be achieved by 2030 and 100% between 2040 and 2050, and you don't need any miracle technologies. We can use the ones we've got. Well, I'm going to take a quick look through here. What it says, we can meet the goal of the Green Deal. It'll just take a little bit longer. But we can do it. It's the goal. Let's look at how existing technologies we've got that can do it. Well, we need to tackle buildings, transport, district heat, power, industry, and on the right-hand side, it shows by 2050, we can do 94% of that entirely with renewable energy. We know about sun and wind now. They're fully commercialized. And the growth in, for the first time, global solar electricity grew faster in 2017 than all fossil fuels and nuclear combined. Solar was the worldwide largest, fastest growth of new energy subsidized construction. The biggest single sector for new global power capacities additions for the second year in 2017 and more in 2018 was solar energy. Renewable energy sources, biomass, geothermal, hydropower, solar, and wind accounted for nearly 20% of the net domestic electrical generation during the first half of 2018. At that point, for the first time, it surpassed the total output of all of the nuclear plants in the United States. And this is the output. This is the output of those things. We're generating more energy with solar and wind now than by all the nuclear plants in the US. California is not poised, they already are. The first state that's adopted a law to require solar panels on all new homes that are constructed starting in 2020. Heavy industries turn into renewables, including aluminum smelters, cement plants, green steel. Companies moving to 100% renewable energy. I'm aware of the time, but I am going to go another 10 minutes. May I do that? Because we're going to have time for questions after. We're just going to let it float over. If all the companies that have pledged that they're going to become 100% renewable energy were lumped together and were a country, it'd be the 23rd largest electricity user in the world. Oh, batteries. The cost of batteries are going way, way down, which is wonderful. We can now combine batteries with solar energy and get the reliability of gas plants, where the solar provides electricity during the daytime, charges the battery in the day, the batteries give the electricity at night. Who needs the reliability of gas plants? We get it with a combination of solar and batteries. Well, we also use batteries for electric cars. And a lot of people think like this about electric cars, but that's not the way it is. These are the electric cars that we now have. And I'm very proud that it's all in the family. That's my daughter, Catherine, who's right here, and her daughter, Morgan, with their 2 electric cars. Good. Leslie and I were in Amsterdam, and we called for a taxi in Amsterdam, and he arrived in a Tesla Model 6 electric car. Whoa! The top 3 electric vehicles also happen to be the 3 safest cars in the US. Well, we've had electric transportation for the public for a long time. Buses, trains in Europe. Now we have the high-speed rail, 250 miles an hour rail. All electrified. We've got that already. Well, this is the toughest nut to crack, but people are working on that one too. So battery cost down will mean that wind and PV combined will give 50% of all global power, including transportation, everything, by 2050. Now, we go back to the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is more than what I just said. End poverty is one of them. The goal of the New Deal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the worst consequences, while also trying to fix societal problems like economic inequality and racial injustice. Now, these are huge things in and of themselves. The fix of all the major ills in one proposal, and the emphasis on its cost in the absence of acknowledging its even greater cost savings in the future, are the weapons of the political criticism. That's just something to watch. Environmental activists said the details are less important than the broad ambition of the plan. It proposes national mobilization of the scale and urgency of the New Deal. 1961, President John Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon by the end of this decade. And the engineers in NASA were all saying, whoa, wait, whoa, I don't know how to do that. 9 years later, we were on the moon. While the scope of the Green New Deal is enormous, experts believe a deep policy discussion would help voters and other Americans grapple with the environmental threats. Where do we go from here? Well, the demonstrations have played a major role in stopping the Vietnam War. The young people and student demonstrations, well, older people too, a major role in stopping the Iraqi war. Note the importance and power of the youth activist movement in affecting governments and bringing about change. So I'm going to end the talk with a message of hope, as this has all been now the last little while. I'm going to let a 16-year-old, she was 15 when she did this, Swedish schoolgirl, do that all for us. Her name was Greta Thunberg, Thunberg, but it's not, Thunberg. And she had her own TED show. And there she was, 6 months ago, with a sign that says, School Strike for Climates, sitting outside the Parliament building in Stockholm. In Greta's own words, when school started in August this year, I decided enough was enough. Sweden had just experienced its hottest summers ever. No one was talking about climate change as an actual consequence of our way of life. We're running out of time. Failure means disaster. This is a 15-year-old talking. The adults have failed us. True. As a student, one way I can push for urgent change is go on strike from school. And she did it. I'll be sitting outside the Swedish Parliament every Friday. And she's still going to school. But every Friday, from now until my country is in line with the Paris Agreement. So that was she. She was prepared just to be by herself and to do this. That's how it started, August 20, 2018. The 50-year-old's lone protest in August of last summer has morphed in 6 months into a powerful global movement challenging politicians to act. Australia was one of the first countries to mobilize. 15,000 students went on Friday strikes. Front of the Parliament House in Helsinki, students. Berlin, the sign says, "Why learn without a future?" as the students marched in the streets. This sign on the right-hand side says, "It can all be different." Look at the number of students. Look what's happened. Berlin, again, you can read that sign. Like the sea level, we rise. In Belgium, there have been strikes by thousands of students for at least 4 consecutive weeks. One now famous placard addressed to politicians and policymakers reading, "I'll do my homework when you do yours." Yeah. Switzerland has seen some of the biggest actions. Local activists said 23,000 joined the strike on 18th January, followed by 65,000, 2nd of February. I mean, look what's happening. In Germany, mobilizations, more and more numbers. I'll skip over this. And they're on Fridays, so now they call it Fridays for the Future. Veteran climate campaigners are astonished by what has been achieved in such a short time. Around the world, so many student strikes are now taking place or planned that it's becoming hard to keep up. They're all the ones right now, happening right now in Europe. The different colors are the different countries. It's come into the United States, and it's just now sneaking into Canada. This is a global phenomenon. The global strike on 15th of March, which is 12 days from now. is going to be the Grand Global Strike, expected to be the biggest yet with mobilizations in 150 cities. All of this from the initial actions of this one courageous girl. And all of this has been accomplished in 6 short months. What can just one person do? Remarkable girl. I'm going to wrap up the talk by letting Greta Thunberg have the last words. These are from her invited talk before the COP24 delegation. She was invited to speak there. She also has just spoken before the UN. She's now being invited to speak everywhere. And here are the words she addressed to the people at the conference. It's supposed to get more rigorous ambition for controlling climate change. If a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. You only talk, this is a tongue lashing, folks, a tongue lashing to the delegates at COP24. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only thing to do is to pull the emergency brake. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us, the children. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you're stealing their futures in front of their very eyes. This is in front of tongue lashing, in front of the delegates. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done rather than what is politically possible, there's no hope. Profound statement. You have ignored us in the past, and you will ignore us again. Come on. We have run out of excuses, and we're running out of time. We have come here to let you know the change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people, and young people have responded. This is the message, and these have been the images of hope with which I'm leaving all of you. Here's Magid Magid, the Sheffield's Lord Mayor, who said, they, the kids, are literally saving our bloody planet. Yes. I think enough people has realized how absurd this situation, she said. We're in the middle of the biggest crisis in human history, and basically nothing is being done to prevent it. I think what we are seeing, said Greta, is the beginning of great changes, and that is very hopeful. I leave you with this image of our future, and I let Martin Luther King Jr. have the last word with his timeless sense of urgency. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there's such a thing as being too late. We must move past indecision to action. That was in the 60s. That was in the civil rights movement. Those words are exactly pertinent to today. We now have the responsibility. We are responsible for the earth that we are now denigrating. But we can't do it alone. We're all in this together. We have to solve it together. And the children will lead us. Thank you very much. Thank you. So it's, I knew it. Thank you. Thank you.